All right. Good morning. By the tolling of the bells at the Carpus household, it looks like it is 9 o'clock. I hope everyone is well. Obviously, there's been a lot of excitement over the last, what do we call it, 16, 18 hours, but also a lot of confusion. So just to kind of fill everybody in where we're at, since the announcement yesterday afternoon after 3 o'clock, we've been trying to get some more clarification from the governor's office on his FAQ statement, which was unfortunately a bit contradictory. So working alongside the other allied associations, we have a call this afternoon at 11 o'clock, this morning at 11 o'clock to kind of talk about a statement coming out from the group to give you all some guidance on what's going to happen on Friday and in the coming weeks. So just know that we're trying our best to get some clarification. We do have contacts in Harrisburg that we've been working with for the last 6 or 7 weeks, but obviously feverishly over the last 16 or 17 hours here. So doing our best to try to get you as much information as we can and hopefully get that to you here ASAP. So if you have any specific questions, you can shoot them to me or to Matt. We'll try to get you those, but it has been difficult trying to get some clarification from the governor's office on some of the most simplest things. So, if you're kind of diving into the weeds on what you might want to do with your BEV card or something along those lines, it's going to be hard to get an exact interpretation from Harrisburg on those minute details. So I think at this point, moving forward, we just want everybody to make sure that you and your staffs are as safe as you can be. Exercise patience. If you can exercise patience, hopefully, your customers and your members can. I'm sure that everybody's going to come out super hot on Friday and wanting to play. I'm sure everybody's phone started to blow up as soon as that announcement came out yesterday afternoon. So, again, just do your best to keep yourselves safe, and we'll have hopefully a statement out here, this afternoon with a little bit of guidance and hopefully some of it from Harrisburg. So that's kind of where we're at Pennsylvania wise, but I'll throw it over to Matt for a few ground rules for today's conversation.
Thanks, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. Hope you're all healthy. If anyone has any technical issues during the presentation today, please use the chat feature and I will try to troubleshoot with you. Just be aware that generally the issues we've been having are due to Wi-Fi connection. So there might only be so much I can do, but I will do my best to walk you through any fixes. Throughout the webinar today, please remain muted. There's a button down at the bottom of your screen. It's a little round icon that looks like a microphone. If you click that, it turns red, then you will be muted. That way we won't have any background noise while Tom is presenting. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the chat feature for that as well, and I will prompt Tom as needed. There is one button on your screen I would like you all to avoid. It says present now. Please avoid clicking that as it will interrupt Tom's presentation. And finally, if any professionals have called in via their telephone today, please send me an email at mfrey@pgahq.com. That way we can make sure you get your MSR credits. With that, I'll throw it back over to Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. As we're in our, I don't know, what installment are we in, Carpy? Is this installment number 7?
Number 7.
7. So we're in installment number 7 of our rules series. Thanks again to Tom and Clark and Alice and Ben and Jeff and everybody on our rules committee for taking care of these. And we've, our turnout's been great, and it looks like we have another good turnout today. And understandably, some folks are going to be busy trying to figure out what's going to happen here at the end of the week. A quick shout out, I saw on the list my old boss, Quentin Griffith. Quinn, I hope you and Rachel and the kids are doing well. I saw you pop on there. But without further ado, I'll turn it over to Tommy, and he'll get us rocking. Thanks, buddy.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Before I dive in here, Clarky, you want to lead us off here this morning?
Sure do. We always want to do that. And I'm searching for modern patriotic songs, but I'm going back to Irving Berlin. So please join me in the comfort of your homes as we sing God Bless America. As the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us pledge allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair, as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
All right, let's go Flyers and let's go Gene Hart. Gotta love it. Well, good morning, everybody. Good news today with golf being back on Friday. I know it's a little bit quick, but I'm sure everybody's anxious to get things going, at least on a limited basis anyway. So I'm really happy for golf in our Philadelphia area, and we can get one step closer to normalcy, if there's such a thing anymore in today's world. So hopefully we can all be safe through this, and in a month or two, we'll be looking back on it, and it'll be in the rearview mirror. We can look ahead, look forward, not back. So we've been able to, this is our 7th session, each of them being 2 hours. So we've been able to accomplish quite a bit and tying everything together with the various relief situations. Today, we're going to go into rules 4 and 5. And if you look at the way the book is laid out, we start with rule 1, the game, rule 2, the course, rule 3, the competition. And it's not by accident that when we get to rule 4, we're now talking about the player's equipment. And under this heading here, we're going to have clubs, balls, use of equipment, whether it be your actual equipment, your clubs, or other things that you carry with you in these 3 sections of Rule 4. So this rule is going to cover conforming and non-conforming clubs, damage during the round, changing playing characteristics, whether it's just through normal use or deliberate. The 14 club limit, we all are familiar with that. We'll talk about that a little bit. The penalties, obviously this rule, particularly for 4.1, we have a penalty statement as opposed to a general penalty of 2 strokes and stroke play, loss of hole, and match play. We have in match play, you'll see we have an adjustment to the match, which is really different. It's the only one left in the book that I'm aware of. So we'll talk about the model local rule that hopefully all the major associations in the world are using it. Hopefully you have it on your hard cards or terms of competition at your club. And then what do you do when you're taking a club out of play? We'll talk about golf balls, conforming, what if they break into pieces, cut or cracked, use of equipment, which is the last part, which is always my the thing I'm most afraid of is when I get a call from somebody about some artificial device that somebody used during the round and whether or not it's a breach of this rule. Kind of a scary thing. So again, we're going to cover equipment players use during the round. We know that the game is supposed to depend on your judgment, skills, and abilities. That's the challenge of it. So with that, we've got to use conforming balls or clubs. We're limited. The magic number is 14, as I like to say. So you can carry less than that, but no more than 14. Normally, you cannot replace damaged clubs or lost clubs. And then, of course, you're restricted in using equipment that if it's going to artificially help you during your play, well, then you're going to be prohibited from using it, or you're going to use, or you would incur a penalty. On USGA.org, we talk about the clubs, balls, other equipment. There's a section under the equipment rules, and all these specifications are listed. If you go to USGA.org, there is a section for, you see on the right there, that's kind of that's the page of it. And it's really laid out nicely. You can go through there and look up different things. It used to be in the back of the decisions book, but it's not there anymore. So this is something you're going to have to go online to look for. Another option, it's quite a few pages, is you could print out a hard copy and just keep it with your rule books or your official guide. That way, in case you don't have internet or you can't get to it, you've got a hard copy to refer to. Just a thought. Again, USGA.org, or hopefully by now all of you have gotten the app on your phones or iPads, which is outstanding. So you can just access it right on there. If you go to full rules on that menu and then you scroll all the way down, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of that page, that main page, you'll see various areas that you can click on, one of which is the equipment rules, and it'll give you specifications. And while I'm there, when we talked before about one of the things that was added to this recently, early in the year, was the ball marker, that it can't exceed 2 inches in diameter, 1 inch in height, and so on. So there are a lot of things listed in there, and that's where you would find that. You won't find it in under a particular rule. So our first section here, we're going to talk about the clubs that you're allowed to have to make a stroke, the 14 club limit, and then what do you do when you have to take a club out of play. So here we go. We're going to dive right in. We've got clubs allowed in making a stroke. And we've got 3 sections here: conforming clubs, use of or repair of a club that's damaged during the round, and then of course changing playing characteristics during the round. So obviously when we make a stroke, we need to use a club that conforms. We've got a bunch of clubs over there on the right, but we've got to use a conforming club, and it has to conform when it's new. Obviously, when you take it out of the box, it needs to conform with all the different things that are back in the equipment rules, and also if it's been deliberately or accidentally changed in any way. So if you're going to add some add lead tape, let's say, to the back of your iron, that's okay. If you're going to add some type of attachment to a putter and weld it on there, well, it's got to conform after you've adjusted it deliberately, the same as if it was when it was new. So if you're going to change something, whether it be deliberate or deliberately, I should say, you want to just be careful with what you do and make sure that that club conforms when you're done making those alterations. The accidental part of it, well, that's a whole nother story. We'll talk about that, where if you accidentally damage the club and whether or not you can use it. We're going to get to that in just a moment. However, now we have this exception here that basically says that if your performance characteristics are changed through normal wear through normal use, and this always amazes me when you look at Hogan's 1-iron, where the wear mark is to the inside. Now I know he was trapping it from the inside, which is probably why that's the case, but that just amazes me that that's where he wore the club out. Most cases you'll see, if you look at wedges where someone's hitting a lot of balls, or with players that practice a lot, the wear mark is right there. So it still conforms if it's through normal use, no problem. We have an interpretation that just takes this a step farther, talking about what do we mean by normal use. That means strokes, practice strokes, practice swings, removing the club and replacing the club out in your golf bag. And then we have some examples here of normal use. Material inside a club head that's broken loose. Sometimes a little piece of epoxy might come loose inside the club and you can hear it rattling around. Well, that club's okay. We're going to say that that's normal use. A wear mark on the grip. Hopefully you're not letting that go too long and you're getting new grips put on your clubs. But if you have a wear mark on your grip from where your thumbs are placed or otherwise, that's okay. That's going to be considered normal use. A depression on the club face or the grooves on the club face are worn. Again, normal use doesn't change the conformity. That's the key part there. Under the section under conforming clubs, we also have what we would call an internal definition that's embedded in this rule. And what do we mean by performance characteristics and changing those? Well, basically, we're talking about the grip shaft, club head, and then add in there lie or loft. That's what's going to make up what we call our performance characteristics, and that affects how the club performs. So grip shaft, club head, lie or loft. All right, so if a conforming club is damaged during the round, the player must not replace it with another club. Now, keep in mind, we have not gotten to the model local rule just yet. We are basically going to give you the text of the rule as it's written, and then we'll see how it's we'll show you how it's modified by this model local rule that was put in shortly after the season got started last year. So, but again, normally it cannot be replaced with another club. Same thing if it's damaged while play is stopped. You normally must not replace it. Of course, we have this exception where if the player didn't cause it, could be natural forces, could be some other outside influence damage your clubs. Well, then we have an exception that allows you to go ahead and replace it. And we'll talk about it.
Get up. Sit there.
Wow, that's dangerous.
He wasn't holding back, Peter.
Oh, no, he wasn't. And he hit a pretty good shot.
Thomas Peters struggled yesterday. Wow.
Thomas Peters, I refereed I walked with his group one time. And oh my God, he is such a big guy over at the Open Championship. But again, we saw a couple cases there where those clubs were damaged, obviously. And here, this part here says, no matter what the nature or cause of the damaged club is treated as conforming for the rest of the round. So over here, we have what's left of Ernie's club. Keep in mind, for it to be considered a club, it has to have what? A shaft and a head, right? So he still has a shaft and a head on this part. So this is going to be considered a club. And even though it might be bent, this club, based on the way this rule is written, this club, if he wanted to use it, he could, because it's treated as conforming for the rest of the round. So he can go ahead and use that if he wanted to. Of course, not during a playoff and stroke play. Remember, a playoff and stroke play is considered a new round. So if you got done the round, you're waiting around. The player that's in contention with you finishes and they tie you. Well, you know what? As you get prepared for the playoff, you can, if you want to change your whole set of clubs, you could. It's considered a new round. So for the rest of the round, the player, as I mentioned, could continue to make strokes with that club. And again, Ernie could go ahead and do it if he wants to. I doubt that he would want to, but he could if he wanted to. He can also repair it. And what we mean by that here is, again, the key part now, again, doesn't matter how the damage happened. He is limited, though, to the same grip, same shaft, same club head. Again, this is now the rule itself without any model local rule in effect. He is limited he can repair it, but he's got to use the same grip, same shaft, same club head. And repair means to restore back as close as possible to what it was before the damage occurred. So if lead tape fell off, you can go ahead and put some lead tape back on. If that piece of lead tape that fell off won't stick, you can take a new piece and put that on there. Again, as long as it's the same, you couldn't take that opportunity to add 4 pieces of tape if one fell off. If one fell off, you can put 1 piece back on, and that's reasonable. Tightening clubs with the adjustable mechanisms that come loose. We've all seen this happen in today's world with clubs. You know, the one of the ports comes loose. You can go ahead and you can tighten it. That we would say that's repairing. So that's not a problem either. You can go ahead and repair it. Of course, we have some restrictions here. You can't unreasonably delay play, and any damage before the round must not be repaired. Now, what we also talk about here is clubs' performance characteristics. If they're changed because of any act during the round, what do we mean by that? And that just means that any act by the player, like making a stroke like we saw with Ernie Els, putting it in and out of the bag, dropping or leaning on it, throwing it, or abusing it. Again, so even if we, again, under the text of the rule, if we abuse our golf club, we are entitled to go ahead and repair it. And that's a significant change from pre-19, where we weren't allowed, if we damaged it, remember, it used to say, other than in the normal course of play, it was over with. You couldn't use the club, and if you did, you were disqualified. Also, if the club is damaged because of any act by any other person, outside influence, or natural forces. So that's what we mean by there. Damage during the round. These are these acts. Now, what you cannot do here, if it's what's not during the round, is what if a player decided, you know what, I've got this thing set at 9.5, and I really need to bump it up a degree because my ball flight's too low. And they go ahead and they loosen it, they make the change, and then they tighten it back up. It's been deliberately changed during the round. Well, that's going to be a problem. That's not something that you are entitled to do, to deliberately change these performance characteristics. Let me go back here for 1 second. You're going to see in just a moment, when we get beyond this model local rule, that if a player did make this adjustment, he has a window of opportunity to fix this without being penalized. So let's now dive into this model local rule. So what did we just say? We said that if a player, no matter how, normally they cannot replace a club. And what we did say was the repair was you were limited to the same grip, shaft, and club head. Very restrictive under that rule. Well, when it got into practice, especially at the high levels, there were a lot of concerns brought forth by the tours and other organizations to the USGA and the RNA. So they came up with this model local rule G9. We have it in effect in our section, as well as every major association that I'm aware of has it. And the rule is modified now in this way. And it basically says if a club is broken or significantly damaged. Now, this has an exception, except in cases of abuse. So if you abuse the club, you're not going to get the benefit of this local rule. But except in those cases, you can replace the club if it's broken or significantly damaged. And then we dive into some examples here of when is it broken or significantly damaged. We talk about a shaft breaking, the face impact area is visibly deformed, the club head is visibly and significantly deformed, club head is detached or loose from the shaft, or the grip is loose. All of these would constitute broken or significantly damaged. Interestingly enough, we have this exception that gets a lot of talk amongst our group on the tour, and that is if a club face or a club head it's not broken or significantly damaged solely because it's cracked. So if I can see a hairline crack on the club face or the club head, I can see the crack. But then the question becomes, is the club head deformed? And right now, the criteria, we would say no, that there has to be some type of deformity in the head, and a crack does not meet that standard. And there's been a lot of testing that, I guess in many cases, if a club head is cracked, it doesn't affect the performance of the golf club. So this exception is in this model local rule. You got to be careful. Again, at the club level, I think you want to make sure you have this so that when you get into your major events, member guests, club championships, etc., that you're giving them, you're giving this benefit to your members, your customers. I would make sure that you have it on your sheets. So in this case, if a club is broken or significantly damaged, again, you can replace it, and then the club that is that you're taking out of play, it must be taken out of play immediately, and it cannot be brought back into play later in the round for any reason. A breach of that would be under 4.1b, which we'll talk about that penalty statement in just a moment. So again, put that local rule in effect. All right, so what if we deliberately, we talked about this just a moment ago, we deliberately change playing characteristics. And the key part here, it says, must not make a stroke with the club where you've deliberately changed the playing characteristics. So the trigger point for the rule here is not the changing of the characteristics, it's the using that club for a stroke. That's when it triggers the penalty. So if you go ahead and you do something to the club, that in of itself is not a penalty. It's when you do it, when you change those characteristics and then use it for a stroke, then you're going to get a penalty. And that's by using an adjustable feature. Obviously, we all are very familiar with this in today's world. Let me go back here for 1 second. Except when you're allowed to repair damage. So if you have if the club just came loose and all you had to do was tighten it up, well, that's allowable. That kind of repair is allowable to restore the club. Or if a weight fell out of a port or came loose, you could go ahead and fix that. That's not a problem. You just couldn't change the weights. You couldn't go from a lighter weight to a higher amount of weight. That would be changing the playing characteristics. Cannot add any substance to the club head. You know, the old grease rule: put some salve on there to reduce spin. Why did you put this substance on the club head? You didn't put it on there to clean it, because if you were just cleaning it, you don't have a problem. But if you put it on there to affect how that club's going to perform for the next stroke, then that would be changing its playing characteristics, and that club could not be used for a stroke, or you would be in breach. Now here's where we have this, I call it the kinder and gentler rules of golf, because we now have, in various parts of the book, we have ways where a player who does something that they're not allowed to do, they're able to fix their mistake and not incur a penalty. So if you went ahead and changed the loft on that driver, and then you realized it before you made a stroke, well, in this case here, you can go ahead and change it back. You can change it back, tighten it up, and you've got no penalty in that case. Keep in mind, this does not apply to someone adding some type of substance to the face of the club. Once you do that, you cannot make a stroke with that club, and you cannot clean it off. This is only for this adjustable feature that you've changed, that you can now change back, lock it in, and you haven't gained any advantage from that. So it does not apply to adding some substance to the face of the club. That would be a breach if you used it to make a stroke. The penalty here is a major one here. This obviously, if you make a stroke with a non-conforming club, or a club where you deliberately changed playing characteristics, or you added something to the face of the club to affect performance, the penalty here, if you make a stroke with it, would be disqualification. Again, there's no penalty for just having it. If you inadvertently had a non-conforming club in your bag, let's suppose you had one of those weighted practice clubs with a reminder grip on it. And that now that just by having it is not a problem. Same thing with if you change playing characteristics. The changing of the characteristics you have not breached the rule yet. The only thing you're restricted from doing is using that club for a stroke. Keep in mind that the club still counts towards your 14. So you couldn't replace it. You're stuck with that club. It's one of your 14, and you just wouldn't be able to use it for a stroke to avoid any penalty. All right, let's talk about the magic number 14. Our limit: no sharing, no replacing in some cases, and then also what do we do when we have to declare one out of play? So obviously we don't want to start around with more than 14. You can start with less. You can start with 10, and that's okay. Gives you the ability to add 4 during the round, and but you cannot have more than 14 clubs during the round. You start with less, you can always add to get up to that 14 club limit. Interesting interpretation here where I'll just go right to the example where this player started the round with 10 clubs, and then he asked somebody to bring 8 clubs with him, and then he would decide which ones he was going to add based on circumstances. Well, we're going to say that because he asked this person to carry these additional 8, that this player would have violated the 14 club rule. Now, you might wonder what idiot would do that. Well, this actually happened, which is why it's an interpretation. The more common thing here might be a player starts with 13 and maybe he has somebody carry a couple of putters with him or a couple different drivers. Well, if you did that, those 2 additional clubs would be counted towards your 14. So if you had 13 in your bag and someone carrying 2, you would have 15 clubs and you'd be in violation of the rule. And that's all we mean by this interpretation. All right, as soon as you become aware that you're in breach of this rule, meaning you got more than 14, you've got to immediately take the excess clubs out of play. Got to go ahead and get back to 14. Interesting here enough, if you started with 14, well, you can, let's say you've got 15 clubs, you started the round with 15 in your bag. Well, whenever you realize this, you can take any one of those 15 clubs out of play to get back to your 14. There's no restriction. Any one of those would be okay. However, if you added a club during the round, you started with 14 and you made the turn and you went into your locker and you grabbed an extra putter because you're putting bad and you added it during the round and then you went on and played and you realized that you couldn't do it, well, then that extra putter would be the one that you'd have to take out of play. So you're restricted if you've added it during the round. Whatever the added club or clubs are, those are the ones that have to be taken out of play to get back to the 14. This makes sense. You know, you start your round and you find a club on the course. And we all want people to just pick it up and as a courtesy. And if you do that, that's not going to be treated as one of your 14. Keep in mind, you cannot make a stroke with it. I can't think of a reason why somebody would, but again, you're picking it up as a courtesy. Again, this is a case where this used to be a decision in the old book, and now they just wrote it right into the rule. Or what if somebody mistakenly puts a club in your bag without your knowledge? You know, you're on the first tee, there's a bunch of people. Think about it on Friday when all your members are hanging around, not complying with social distancing. All their golf bags are going to be lined up. I come off the putting green and I inadvertently put my putter in someone else's bag. That player has no idea what I did, so we're not going to penalize that player in that case. That club is not treated as one of the 14 and it must not be used. Now, once we realize that, obviously, we would probably turn that putter back into the golf shop and get it back to its rightful owner. Not allowed to share clubs. You're limited to clubs that you selected, but you cannot share. So if you must not make a stroke with a club used by anyone else playing on the course. That would be considered sharing. soon as you become aware of this by making a stroke with another player's club, then you got to immediately get rid of that club. Got to get rid of it. And we talk about our team formats, foursome, 4-ball. Again, if you and your partner want to share clubs, you can do it provided the number of clubs between you equals 14. You couldn't each have 14. But if you wanted to carry one set of clubs, 14, and you agree and you want to share those 14 clubs, that's okay. You can put 2 sets of clubs in one bag if you want to. That's okay. I certainly wouldn't recommend this because you want to make sure that the clubs are identifiable to each player. So as long as if you decide to do this, as long as you don't use the other player's club, one of their clubs, you're okay. All right, what if you start with 14 and then you lose or you damage a club during the round or while play is stopped? You must not replace it with another club. So no replacement here if you lose it in particular or damage it. Except, of course, we have this exception. What if you didn't cause the damage? If it was done by outside influence, natural forces, by any person other than the player or his or her caddy. And I'll give you an example. Your caddy sets the bag down on the fairway, and he's walking up to get a yardage, and you're standing there getting ready to play, and a big gust of wind comes along and blows the bag over. The bag falls, and the driver head snaps off. We would say that what caused that bag to move, it was natural forces. And that player would be entitled to replace that club because it was not caused by the player. That bag was not in the hands of his caddy or the player. Since the player or the caddy did not cause that bag to fall, natural forces did. Well, then this exception would apply in that case. If the caddy just clumsily knocked the bag over, different story. Or if the player knocked the bag over. Keep in mind that this model local rule, if it's in effect, we just said that you couldn't replace it. But again, if other than abuse, if that club is significantly broken or damaged, we can go ahead and replace as per the local rule. And when you are entitled to replace, you can replace it with any club. So if I break my wedge because I made a stroke next to a root, my 60-degree wedge, and I'm entitled to replace it. Let's suppose I'm putting really bad that day. When I replace the club, I can add a putter. I don't have to add another 60-degree wedge. I can replace it with any club. Okay, now when I do this, obviously the club that I'm taking out of play, that club gets taken out of play immediately when I replace it with another club. And I won't be able to bring that club back into play no matter what later in the round. All right, when we do this, when we're adding or replacing clubs, of course we can't unreasonably delay play. We can't add or borrow any club from anyone else who's playing on the course. And the last piece, we can't build a club from parts carried by anyone for the player during the round. That's key language right there, folks. So one thing you cannot do is put an extra driver club head in your bag just in case your driver head breaks. Okay, essentially these parts need to come from off the course in the event that your like say your driver is damaged. It's not just cracked, it's deformed, and you're entitled to replace it. Well, you can have someone from the club bring out, if it's the club head, they can bring out another head, and you can detach it and add the new head on. Or if it's just the shaft breaks, somebody can bring out a shaft for you, and you can repair it that way, replace it that way. But again, when you use these parts that you're going to use to put this club back together, They can't be parts carried by anyone for the player during the round. That means you can't have your spouse, your significant other, your friends, your family walk along watching you. You can't say, hey, you know what? Do me a favor, carry this extra driver head in your with you in case I have a problem with my driver. Well, you could not use that to build a club in the event that the club was damaged and you were entitled to replace it, or if you're entitled to add a club. All right, we're here to our penalty statement. And this is very unique to Rule 4.1. What if you become aware of the breach while you're playing the hole? And then the second part is what happens if it's between holes. And this just goes on to, we're going to show you here how you're going to apply the penalty during the play of a hole. The penalty is applied at the end of the hole being played. Another way to look at this is you're going to finish the hole based on your talent. You're going to continue to play the hole based on your talent, get the ball in the hole, and you'll have a score. Now in match play, you're going to complete the hole, apply the result of that hole to the match score, and then apply the penalty to adjust the match. So again, this is an adjustment to the match. It is very easy for people to start down the first hole. They get down to the fairway, and one of them realizes they've got too many clubs in their bag, and they holler over to their opponent, hey, Clarky, I've got 15 clubs in my bag. You know what? You win the hole. Well, that's not what the rule says. The rule says we're going to finish the hole based on our talent, and then we're going to adjust the match accordingly, and we'll see how we do that in just a moment. You're going to see that it's one hole for each hole which the breach occurred, maximum of 2. So in that first hole, which is when a lot of this happens, in the case with Clarky, we would finish the hole based on our talent and then apply the one hole adjustment before we go to the second hole. So if I won the first hole and I would get a one hole adjustment, I would be 2 up after only playing one hole. If we tied the hole, I would be 1 up. If I lost the hole, we would then be all square. Match would be tied. So again, it's not a loss of hole penalty. It's an adjustment to the match. Finish the hole based on your talent and then apply the penalty. If it happens between holes, then the penalty is applied to the hole that you just completed, not the next hole. You have not started the next hole yet. So if we then find out that a player has too many clubs, it's based on the hole just completed. That's how we're going to treat this. So again, here in match play, we have a hole deduction, 1 hole for each hole which the breach occurred, maximum of 2. Not a loss of hole penalty. There we go. 1 hole for each hole which the breach occurred. So we have an example here. Player started with 15 clubs. So they started the round. And when did they become aware of this? While playing the third hole. So what are we going to do there? We're going to finish the third hole based on talent and then apply the penalty. This player wins that hole to go 3 up in the match. So we say 1 hole for each hole which the breach occurred, maximum of 2. So now there would be a 2-hole adjustment. So instead of being 3 up, this player would only be 1 up. Now, what if it was the other player? If I was 3 up and I discovered that Clarky had too many clubs while playing the third hole, and I won that hole to go 3 up, when there would be a 2-hole adjustment, I would be 5 up, and we've only played 3 holes. So again, it's an adjustment to the match. Stroke play, we're adding 2 penalty strokes, maximum of 4. Again, for 2 strokes for each hole which the breach occurred, maximum of 4. The key part here, folks, is to get the numbers on the proper holes, the penalty strokes on the right holes. So if you start on hole number 1 and you walk off the first green and you realize you got too many clubs, you're going to need to add 2 penalty strokes to the first hole. If you started on 10, that's where your round started, same circumstances, you would then add 2 penalty strokes to hole number 10 If it was a shotgun and you started on 14, that was your first hole, you would add those 2 penalty strokes to hole 14. Please make sure you put them on, you take care of the accounting when you have this situation occur in stroke play, so you don't have a problem with signing an incorrect scorecard. All right, how about taking clubs out of play during the round or before the round? Let's go with during the round first. Okay, so if you become aware during the round you've got more than 14, or you share clubs, you got to take immediate action of taking a club out of play, whatever that, and this could come in different ways. You'll notice. Let me go back here for 1 second. This player turned the club upside down in the bag. That's okay too. But you could do this several different ways. You could declare it. I can say, hey, look, I've got 15 clubs, and this player over here on the right says I'm going to take my 7-wood out of play. He forgot to take it out of the bag, left it in there. You just got to do it immediately to your opponent, match player, or someone else in your group in a stroke play setting. Or you take some other clear action, turning the club upside down, laying it on the floor of the cart, putting it in the basket of the cart, giving the club to someone to put back in your locker. Any of those actions would be okay in terms of taking a club out of play during the round. Okay, and then when you do this, you must not make a stroke for the rest of the round with any club taken out of play. So our breach of this rule right here, if you made a stroke with that club that you declared out, the penalty would be disqualification. Now, if I shared a club, I borrowed someone else's putter, I violated the rule, I get the penalty, then I got to immediately take it out of play. Well, that other player can get that club back, and they're okay to use it. This is kind of a very narrow set of circumstances where shortly before starting the round, what I mean shortly would mean probably you're standing on the tee getting ready to play, not 15 minutes before on the range. What if you accidentally realize you have more than 14 clubs? You should try to leave the excess clubs behind. Also, what you can do, again, narrow set of circumstances. This is shortly before you begin your round. The rules are going to let you declare the excess clubs out of play and start the round accordingly. So you could you can make this declaration. You could turn the club upside down. You could put it on the floorboard of the cart, in the basket of the cart. That would be okay if it happens shortly before you start your round. A very narrow set of circumstances when you're entitled to do this. So these excess clubs may be kept with the player, but obviously you're restricted from using them. They do not count towards your 14 club limit. And it must not be used for the remainder of the round. Now, this doesn't allow you to now deliberately bring that extra club up to the tee with you. If you deliberately bring more than 14 to the first teeing area without leaving the excess clubs behind, well, then this rule does not apply. Again, narrow set of circumstances. It's really by accident. You forgot to take the extra putter, that extra driver, that extra wedge out of your bag, and you realize it right when you're getting ready to start your round. And the idea behind that is, if you had a circumstance where you were playing in a shotgun, the rule before really limited you on what you could do. You basically had to leave the club near that teeing area and risk the chance of it becoming lost. This gives you the ability to keep the club with you, declare it out of play, and go ahead and start your round. Very narrow set of circumstances. All right, so our question here under clubs, in which case is player not required to take a club out of play? So let's read these. When the player discovers he's got more than 14, well, we just said you must declare a club out of play when you discover you have more than 14. So we know that's not true. B, when the player who started his round with 14, he switches putters after the 9th and starts the 10th hole and realizes he was not allowed. Well, now what this player, again, in question A, this player, if they started the round with 15 clubs, he can take any one of those 15 and take one of them out of play to get back to 14. In this case, this player added this 15th club during the round. He wasn't allowed. What does he have to do? He has to get rid of that extra putter that he grabbed at the turn. That's the club he has to declare out of play. So we know that's not true. This next one here, after the player deliberately changed playing characteristics, one of his clubs during the round, even though he hasn't used it since he changed it. That sounds like the right answer, but let's read on to the last one. After realizing he used another player's club by mistake to make a stroke. So we have a sharing of clubs. And we know that if that happens, he has to get rid of that club. And then that other player is entitled to have it back. But so C is the correct answer. If I change playing characteristics of one of my clubs, I haven't made a stroke with it. I'm not allowed to use that club. And as long as I don't, I'm okay. But I don't have to, I'm not required to take it out of play. A little bit of a nuance there with that part of the rule. Any questions on clubs?
Yeah, we have two, Tom. One from Ross Brown. Can you put grip tape, tennis tape, or wrap over a putter grip? I believe Scott Verplank used to do that.
Okay, so I believe, again, these are the kind of questions when it comes to equipment and all the stuff in the equipment rules, where I will be the first to tell you that I'm not always 100% sure. This one, though, you can do it as long as you don't put an excessive amount of tape and there's no bulging. Same thing would apply if at the end of your putter you had a leather grip where the leather started becoming unraveled. You could take a little piece of tape and repair it, but you couldn't put an excessive amount where you would have a bulge. And I believe it's the same case with that tape applied over the grip. And that would be, you would look in the equipment guide to verify that. I believe that's the way it's written in there.
Great. And Graham asked, what if a player starts the round with 16 clubs? What is the penalty?
Okay. Well, the rule says more than 14. So depending on whether if it's found during the play of a hole, it doesn't matter whether it's 15 or 21. You're more than 14. So if it's during the play of a hole, or they started the round with more than 14, let's say they started with 20, they've got to get rid of 6 clubs and they can pick any 6. If they added those clubs during the round, then whatever clubs they added, those are the clubs that must be taken out of play during that round. So whether it's 15, 16, 20, more than 14 is the standard for the rule.
And that's all the questions we have at the moment.
All right, let's talk about golf balls. 3 sections here, conforming balls, breaking into pieces. What if it becomes cut or cracked? I think we're all pretty familiar with this rule. This has not changed too much. Again, we've got to use a conforming golf ball. And again, usually there's a conforming ball list on the first tee or the first and 10th tee if we have a 2-tee start. Those are usually in the starter's box if you're not sure about whether or not the golf ball you're using is on that list. You can borrow golf balls during the round. Used to be someone used to think you couldn't do that, but no, there's no problem. The problem is borrowing clubs and making a stroke with a borrowed club. Golf balls are a whole nother, borrowing someone's umbrella. That's okay. Borrowing someone's towel. That's okay. Borrowing golf balls is okay. So a player must not make a stroke whose performance characteristics have been deliberately altered. Again, here the trigger point is making a stroke at this ball. So if you added some type of substance to the golf ball to enhance its performance, it's not a problem if you realize it and you just put that ball away and don't use it and use a different ball. It's when you make a stroke at it where the penalty is triggered. And obviously this is by scuffing it, by heating it up. Think about it. When I don't know if Tom Smith's on the line, but how many guys have heaters in their golf carts when they play the Winter League? And again, if you deliberately heat your golf ball, well, you're in violation of this rule. I get this question 10 times a year. Someone has hot hands in their pocket and they deliberately put the ball in their pocket and wrap the ball in their hot hands. Are they deliberately heating the ball? I'd say yes, probably 100 times out of 100. If it was inadvertent, no problem. Or by adding any other substance other than cleaning it. So if you make a stroke after you do this, this penalty would be disqualification. All right, if a ball breaks into pieces after the stroke, no penalty, stroke does not count. You know, a long time ago, probably back when Clark was a junior golfer, the rule used to say that you would play the largest piece. Interesting how the history of the rules have changed things. Now, if we have a ball that breaks into pieces after a stroke, there's no penalty and the stroke doesn't count. And you might say, well, geez, this never happens. Well, I can remember when I've been out of Kennett Square now for almost 3 years, but one of my last years there during our member tournament, lots of money on the line. We've got a player coming up the 18th hole, and if you know Kennett, you've got a boundary on the left-hand side, dogleg left, short par 5. And this player was a higher handicapper. He gets 2 strokes on the 18th hole. He drove it perfect in the fairway, hit his second shot, and then he called me over. I happened to be driving out to take care of something, and he called me over. And when we got to his ball, a big chunk of the ball had broke into pieces. So he asked me, and the big chunk is lying right in the middle of the fairway, 100 yards from the green, in a perfect position to lay up from. Well, I told him he had to, the stroke didn't count and he had to replay the stroke. Of course, he asked me, are you sure? I said, yes, I am. I'm 100% sure. So he goes back, replays the stroke, and he proceeds to duck hook it out of bounds, makes a 9 on the hole, and nets 7. And they didn't win the tournament. They were in contention at the time. So up on the patio, once again, he asked me, are you sure? And I said, absolutely. And I said to him, the ball that he was using was not one that he bought from my golf shop. And I said to him, I said, you know, I don't sell defective golf balls. In the future, I would just make sure you're using balls that you purchase from your PGA professional. There you go. How about that? All right, so if this happens, the player must go back to where the previous stroke was made. We've talked about this under a couple different rules. When this is an option under stroke and distance, you're going, or in this case, the stroke was canceled. It could be a case where you've made a stroke out of turn in a match, and your opponent is requiring you to replay the stroke. And we've referenced this multiple times, where if it was from the teeing area, you're going to replay from the teeing area. If it's in the general area, you're going to drop it. General area, bunker, penalty area. And if it was on the putting green, you're going to place it. All right. And if you play from a wrong place, so if this ball breaks into pieces and you don't replay the stroke, you will have played from a wrong place. And then you got to evaluate, was it a serious breach, et cetera, et cetera. All right, what if your ball is cut or cracked? Remember, the rule used to say cut, cracked, or out of shape. Well, it's now just says cut or cracked. And I think they did that because in every case through testing, if a ball was cut or cracked, it was also out of shape. So now we talk about lifting the ball to see if it's cut or cracked. And then when are we entitled to substitute? So during the play of a hole, if you reasonably believe your ball is cut or cracked, we're going to let you lift it to look at it. But we're going to have some strings attached here. And this is based on the premise of one of the principles of the game of playing the ball as it lies. We're going to let you lift this golf ball while you're playing a hole. So when you do this, you're going to have to mark it. You're not entitled to clean it. Oops, let me go back here for a second. You're going to have to mark it, and you're not entitled to clean it. Notice the prior to 19, you used to be required to announce what you were doing. There's no requirement to announce anything here. You just have to mark it. You're not entitled to clean it. You lift it up, take a look at it, and see if it's cut or cracked. No requirement to announce. And you might ask, why is that? Well, when you, under any rule, like taking relief from a cart path, there was no requirement to announce to anybody that you were taking relief from a sprinkler head or a cart path. So merely this now makes it consistent with other rules when we can just go ahead and lift our golf ball. Now, what happens if we either, any or all of these, this is if you lift it when you don't have reasonable belief, did you make a stroke or did the ball hit something where you could honestly believe that it's cut or cracked? Hard to believe somebody would do this, but if you did lift it without having reasonable belief, or you failed to mark it, or you cleaned it. So if you did any one or all of these, you're going to get a one single penalty stroke. So if you lift it without reasonable belief and you fail to mark it, you might as well go ahead and clean it, because any or all of these constitutes one breach and one penalty stroke. That's what we mean right here with this statement here. All right, when can you substitute? Well, if it is cut or cracked. This top example here, you can see there, that ball's cut or cracked, and the damage happened during the hole played. If I'm playing the fifth hole and this damage occurred on the third hole, well, I can't lift it on the fifth hole and take it out because it's cut or cracked. I had to do that on the third hole. Again, during the hole in which you're playing. But a scratch or a scrape or discolored paint, that's not cut or cracked. Ball hits a cart path and is scuffed, hits a tree and is scuffed. That ball would not be cut or cracked, and you could not substitute in that case. So here we go. If it is cut or cracked, what are you entitled? Well, you're allowed to replace. You can replace it with another ball on the original spot. You don't have to replace it. You can put your original ball back if you don't feel the need to replace it. But again, if it's cut or cracked, you can go ahead and substitute. If it's not cut or cracked, then you got to put the original ball back. Okay, and you're not entitled to clean it here, remember. Of course, other rules may allow you to substitute. So if you lifted your ball because you had interference from a cart path, and you also picked it up to look at it to see if it was cut or cracked, well, when you drop away from an immovable obstruction, pardon me, you're entitled to substitute. So that would be okay. That's all we mean. What we mean by this statement right here. All right, so if we substitute when we're not allowed, or we play from a wrong place, and we also failed to mark it, or we cleaned it, and we play from a wrong place, all of that goes away with just a general penalty. It's like kind of a package deal. If you commit a bunch of sins, you're just going to get the general penalty under this rule. If you substitute when you're not allowed, and you play from a wrong place, and you didn't follow the procedure, you're just going to get the general penalty. Let me go back to this for 1 second. So let's just review for 1 second. If we violate the procedure, meaning we lift it without reasonable belief, we fail to mark it, or we clean the ball, that's a one-stroke penalty. If we substitute when we're not allowed to, or we play from a wrong place, meaning when we lift it, we have to put it back, right? We just get the general penalty, which would be 2 strokes in stroke play, loss of hold in match play. That's easy. But the procedural issue is a 1-stroke penalty. The general penalty is 2. Any questions here on golf balls? All right, let's go to the last piece of this. We'll talk about equipment, prohibited uses. We have medical issues. First, we have a definition. What is equipment? Anything used, worn, held, or carried by the player or the player's caddy. So all these things. This rake that's, let me just go to the next step here. Objects for care of the course, such as rakes, are equipment only when they're being held or carried by the player or the caddy. So this player with the rake in his hand, that's equipment right now. When he lays it back on the ground, it's no longer equipment after he rakes the bunker. All right, now we're going to talk about use of equipment during the round. When we talk about clubs and balls, that we just covered that in the first part of this. This rule only talks about the use of equipment. All right, player's allowed to use equipment to help his or her play during the round. There we go. So this player's good form right there, good setup. Except you can't use equipment to create a potential advantage. And here it's a little hard to see because it's blue, but this alignment rod is blue. So he's got this alignment rod, which he can carry in his bag. Just carrying his bag is no problem. But when he uses it like this during the round to gauge how much hip turn he has, well, then that's going to be a violation. So things like that. If you use equipment that artificially eliminates or reduces the need for skill or judgment, essentials of playing the game, then we're going to have a problem. If you use equipment in an abnormal way, this example on the right here, now can he make practice strokes with this ball there? Sure. But if he makes a stroke at the ball that counts towards his score with that ball to help his stroke, then that would be a violation. Now we have other rules. Again, this is just this language here is playing traffic cop, and it's pointing you to Rule 10, where this player put a club down for alignment, for other help. We're going to go to Rule 10 to deal with that, and you're going to see that that's going to be a breach. But Rule 10 is going to sort that out, not Rule 4. This part of the rule has 6 sections, all dealing with examples of what is allowed and what's not allowed. So we're going to dive right in here. Distance or directional information. Obviously, the rule now says you can use distance measuring devices or a compass. We get that question a lot. A compass is okay. So you can use distance measuring devices. However, you cannot use a device if it measures elevation changes. We're interpreting distance information. Now one of the good things now with the rules is if you have one of these devices that has the toggle switch on it, which can give you slope information, as long as you have that toggled off and you're only measuring distance, you're okay. Even though it's capable of measuring something else, as long as you don't use that feature, you're okay. And again, we're now in the reverse of what it used to be prior to 19. We now, by rules, without any local rules in effect, you can use distance measuring devices. However, committees could put in place a local rule that prohibits them. Like we do on the tours, we still don't allow distance measuring devices in our tournaments. Wind and other weather conditions. You can look at an app on your phone and look at weather information, including wind speed. Why would that be? Well, this is you're not measuring anything here. You're just looking at it. Someone else has already done the measurement, and you're accessing it on your phone from weather forecast. That's going to be okay. You can measure measuring temperature and humidity at the course. That's okay. What you're not allowed to do is measure wind. Here we have an anemometer that measures wind speed, or you use powder to assess wind direction. That would be a breach. You couldn't do that. Again, all these examples, you're allowed to use information that was gathered before the round. Swing tips, and you write it on your glove there. Anything before the round, that's going to be okay. You can record, but this is for use after the round, playing or physiological information, club distance, playing stats, heart rate. You can record that during the round, but you have to use it after the round. You couldn't record it and use it during the round. That would be a breach. And here's what we mean right here. So if you're recording this information and you use it during the round, so if you have one of these deals where you're looking at your heart rate, and you're recording that and then using it during the round, that would be a breach. So be careful. All right, here's everybody's favorite topic: listening to audio or watching video on matters unrelated to the competition being played. How many people have members that play music when they play golf anymore? I mean, it is like it's spreading like wildfire. Everybody's got music playing, and on the surface, that's okay if it's just background music. However, you got to show consideration to other players, which usually means you got to control the volume, although some people don't get that. But what's not allowed is if this music, you're turning it on to eliminate distractions or to help with swing tempo. You put your earbuds in so you can just block out the whole world and listen to Mozart or listen to Frank Sinatra. If you're doing it to eliminate distractions or to help with your swing tempo, that would be a breach. And that's somewhat of a subjective thing. So you got to be careful with that. And ask, why would a player do that? What are the reasons why they're doing that? It's also not allowed as video of play of the player or other players during the competition that might help them in choosing a club, making a stroke, etc. I think we all get that. Now, there is a local rule, a model local rule under G8, where you can prohibit or restrict the use of these audio devices, meaning not play music. So let's say if it's depending on the competition. Now, at member clubs, to do this at a member guest would be suicide if you were in my view. I think you have to allow it just because that's part of the way people have fun these days. I think you just encourage them to keep it, to be considerate of other people and maybe control the volume a bit. All right, gloves and gripping agents are allowed. You can wear plain gloves. You can use resin powders, moisturizing or drying agents. That's okay. You can wrap a towel or handkerchief around the grip. That's okay. What's not allowed is, again, we get into these equipment rules, a glove that doesn't meet. So it's got an attachment on here. It's got ribs on it so that the club can fit in there. That would not be allowed. Right here, you see other equipment that gives an advantage of hand position or grip pressure. Got this gadget right here. And again, carrying this with you and in your golf bag does not breach the rule. It's the use of it that triggers the penalty. For general stretching, that's okay. Equipment for stretching, for general stretching is all right. Whether it's designed for stretching or use in golf, alignment rod across the shoulders, rubber tubing or a section of pipe, that's okay. Putting a club across your shoulders, that's okay. What's not allowed would be, again, using a donut, using an alignment rod for this purpose. So you could use this alignment rod across your shoulders to stretch out. But why is this player using this rod this way? He's gauging his hip turn. So that would be considered a swing aid in this instance, and that player would be in breach. Same thing with putting a weighted donut on the club. And that's for a practice swing or in any other way to create a potential advantage. Green reading materials, everybody's topic. We don't see this a lot, but again, we do it on the tour level. We deal with this stuff every week. We have, you'll love this story, where at a recent event, Terry Holt, who caddies for Bernard Longer, he comes to me with a book that he had for Newport Beach Country Club that was was from 2003. So it was 17 years old. He had an old book and wanted to know if he could use it. Well, we have to go through this process where we have to measure to make sure that the book meets these new green reading material limitations. So again, the whole key here was what really hit the tipping point with this was when Webb Simpson was carrying around 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper during the players and flipping pages during the round, and people, it just didn't look right. So again, now we're going to limit the size and scale of these putting green maps. So you can use these putting green maps, but again, they have to 3/8 for every 5 yards. So there's a little device that the USGA has that you can buy. They're like, I think they're 90 cents or something a piece, maybe $1. And it's a grid that you can just put right over the book, and making sure that this right here, this is a 5-yard increment, that can't exceed 3/8 of an inch. So it's got to meet the scale limit. Also, the book itself, again, 7, 4 and a quarter. You can't use a book that's larger than that. If you have a whole sheet, same limitations apply. You cannot use a magnifying glass to read this stuff. You've got to just use your normal prescription glasses or lenses, but nothing that would magnify the information. Handwritten notes are okay. If they're written by the player or his caddy, as long as you're using this paper that meets the size. The size limitations of 4.5 by 7. So any handwritten notes are okay. You don't see this very often, but if you have an electrical or digital putting green maps, we've got must meet the size and scale limits. Again, you got to be careful when you're using these. I would suggest you print this thing out. If you have yardage books at your club, it's a good idea to make sure that they do conform to these green reading materials. Keep in mind that the breach of the rule is not the carrying of these green reading materials. It's when you access these materials when you have a stroke from the putting green or a stroke from near the putting green with a putter where the ball will end up on the green. That's what triggers the penalty. If you carry a big book and you never use it for a putt or a stroke near the putting green with a putter, you will never breach the rule. So keep in mind that that's the trigger point for the breach. All right. Again, we're going to point you to the equipment rules to look at these different things. If you're not sure, ask the committee. Committee can make a decision on what you got there. All right. Normally, you can use motorized transportation, but the committee can prohibit it. We have kind of a mixture on the PGA Tour Champions, where some events are walking only, and others we do allow motorized transportation. If a player has a medical issue, we can give a medical exception, but it's got to meet a criteria. So in this case here, the first piece is that this equipment uses it to help with the medical condition. You see Paula Creamer, this was at the Women's U.S. Open a few years back, where she had a problem with her thumb, and she had this device put on her hand, and she went to the committee beforehand. Again, did she have a medical reason to use this? Yes. And then she went to the committee, and the committee decided that the use of this didn't give her any unfair advantage over the other players. So she was allowed to use. I think Mickelson did it too at the U.S. Open. Same type of thing. Tape or similar covering. You see a lot of this tape now that's out there. Again, you can use adhesive tape or similar covering for any medical reason, such as to prevent an injury or help with an existing injury. However, again, if it's excessive or it's giving the player more help than necessary for the medical reason, which gives you this, it immobilizes the joint, helps with the player swing. So there is a point where a player could go too far here. And maybe if they've got that big of a problem, maybe they shouldn't be playing that week or in that event or on that day. So you got to be careful. Most cases, players are going to come to you as the committee and ask you, can they use these things? Again, should go to the committee and get and ask. Again, interesting, the penalty statement for this rule is the first breach is a general penalty, and we have an interpretation right here. Player gets a general penalty. So it's 2 strokes in stroke play, loss of hole, and match play. If it occurs between the play of 2 holes, we're going to apply it to the next hole, because you could do something in between holes that is assisting you with the play of the next hole. And so you take that alignment rod, put it across your hips in between holes because you're looking at your hip turn. Well, you're doing that to assist your play of the next hole. So that's where the penalty would apply. That's what we mean by that. If you do it a second time, it doesn't have to be the same thing twice. You could use a donut on the first hole during the play of the first hole. That's a breach. You could use the alignment rod to check your hip turn at a later hole on after the second breach. Even if they're unrelated, then you'd be disqualified for the use of that equipment. All right, a lot of stuff going on here. Any questions on equipment or use of equipment here? I'm going to queue up the next presentation. If anybody has a question, go ahead and fire away. Oops. Is that coming up on the screen there, Matt?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, good. All right, so now we're going to dive into Rule 5, playing the round. And there's fewer slides here, so bear with me. I know that Rule 4 has a lot going on there. Even though we have a lot of sections here, we're gonna go through this. A lot of this, I think we all are pretty familiar with. We have 7 sections under Rule 5. When does a round start and end? What about practice? We call this the Allen Iverson rule. In groups, pace of play, and of course, stopping and resuming play. Okay, we're expected to start on time, play at a prompt pace. When it's your turn to play, we have a recommendation of no more than 40 seconds. First, we have a definition. What does the word round mean? We used to say stipulated round. Now we just say round. What is a round? 18 or fewer holes played in the order set by the committee. Set by the committee. So that could be starting on 1 or 10. Could be in a shotgun, where you're setting the order, committee setting the order of the holes played based on your hole assignment. Again, 18 or fewer played in the order set by the committee. All right, what if the round ends in a tie? This part we're going to talk about it. What do we do in match play? What do we do in stroke play? So in a tied match, the match is the default part of the rule here says that you're going to extend this match 1 hole at a time until there's a winner. It's not a new round. It's an extension of that round. In stroke play, it's a new round. New round. So put it in the context of clubs, which is the rule we just got done with. In match play, if you're going to extra holes, you're playing in the same round, so you could not change clubs, replace a club. In stroke play, you finish the round, you come in, you're waiting in the clubhouse, you're getting ready to go out for a playoff, and if you want to go ahead and change putters, go ahead and do it. That would be okay because you're between rounds. All right, players playing his or her round from when it starts until it ends, except when when we stop play. We'll talk about that in a little while. This rule talks about actions during the round, not while play is suspended or otherwise noted by the rules. Again, a lot of rules apply. There are a lot of rules that apply even when play is stopped, but there are many that don't. We're not expecting you to remember all these, just that there are a mixture of both. All right, practice before or between rounds. Practicing on the course means playing a ball, testing the surface of the putting green of any hole by rolling a ball or rubbing its surface. Again, this is before or between rounds. Okay, and these limitations apply only to the player, not to the player's caddy. So if a caddy goes out on the golf course and rolls putts, that in of itself is not a breach. Now, we on our tour, and I think all the tours, PGA of America, same way, we have restrictions that the caddies, if they go out the morning of an event before the round, they can go out and walk the golf course, look at hole locations. They just can't walk on the greens. That would be a policy issue that they would run into. But again, this rule is to legislate the players, not the caddies, because before or between rounds. Okay, let's talk about match play first. In match play, player can practice before the round or between rounds of a match play competition. No problem here. That's the default. They can practice. In stroke play, you cannot practice before the round. So a different answer in a stroke play competition. Of course, we have an exception. The player can practice putting or chipping on or near the first tee. Of course, any practice area is okay. Let me go back here for 1 second here. Again, putting or chipping on it, you're at the first tee, you're getting ready to play. If you want to roll a couple putts or hit a couple little chip shots, that's okay. Of course, we want you to go practice on any practice area. That's okay. Also, and this is new, can practice on the course after completing play of his or her final round for that day. What does this mean? Well, many of us at our clubs have a competition that's Saturday and Sunday. So let's say men's club championship, they play Saturday morning and you get done playing, and in the afternoon, you want to go out and play holes with your family. And that used to always be a question that would come up. Well, now the rule basically says you don't have any more golf that's part of the tournament for that day, so go ahead and go out and play. You can practice on the course after completing play for the final round for that day. Of course, the committee has the power to reverse these defaults in any way they want. If they want to prohibit something or allow something, they have the power to do it. Penalty statement, if you for the first breach is the general penalty, second breach is a DQ. So if I go out on the golf course and I make that one practice stroke on the course, the first practice stroke, I get the general penalty. If I do it with a second ball, second stroke, then I'm disqualified. All right, when does the round start? When you make your first stroke on your first hole. That's when the round starts. Got to start at the time set by the committee. And that means you got to be ready to play at your starting point set by the committee. Means you got to have a club and a ball. Got to have a club and a ball ready to go. And 9 o'clock means 9 o'clock. Not the sweep hand on your watch, or if you have an atomic watch. We had a countdown at the championship last year where we had a player that was literally 2 seconds late to the tee at Bethpage. They weren't on the tee. We had sent a message for people to be on the lookout for this player. Player realized it, and they were literally running over the walking bridge, coming down the steps, and our starter, Larry Startzel, right here, was doing a countdown, and he got to the player's time, and the player stepped off the walking bridge about 2 seconds after and was given the penalty. So you got to be on the tee, ready to play, club and a ball at a time laid down by the committee. Now, if the starting time is delayed, then there's no breach, as long as the player is present and ready to play when the group is able to start. So let's use the same example I just gave you. This player at Bethpage was running, and he steps down off that walking bridge 30 seconds after his tee time. But because the group in front of them had trouble, maybe they had a ruling, player had a difficult shot, they were still in the drive zone. So his group couldn't start. Well, this player lucked out. But again, if they were able to start at that time, he would be penalized. But if there was something happened, slow play, ruling, et cetera, there'd be no penalty, and that player would be able to start when the fairway cleared. Late to the tee, penalty is DQ. There are 3 exceptions here. We say that if you arrive no more than 5 minutes, so if you get to the tee in 5, you can start with the general penalty. If you start the round more than 5 minutes early, you're disqualified. If it's less than 5 minutes, so it's the same, the penalty for starting late is the same as early. And then we have exceptional circumstances where a player would not be disqualified, meaning you're a doctor, you're on your way to the tournament, you pull over to the side of the road to give somebody life-saving first aid, and that's why you're late. Then the exceptional circumstance you would not be disqualified. You'd be able to start. There aren't many reasons there, folks, that you would allow somebody to get there late. Stuck in traffic, bad directions, those don't count. You got to plan accordingly. So then the first one here, if you get there within 5, you just get the general penalty, and it's applied to the first hole. So in stroke play, you're adding 2 penalty strokes. In a match play setting, Clark and I are playing. If I'm late to the tee, I lose the first hole. We just go to the second tee. If we're both late, then that first hole is going to be halved, and we just start the match on the second hole. Same thing with starting early. As long as you're not more than 5 minutes early, if you make a stroke to start the round, you're going to get the general penalty to that first hole. Penalty for starting early is the same as starting late. And of course, we have our exceptional circumstances. We have this interpretation here, which gives you some guidance if you have somebody late to tee and whether or not it would be considered exceptional circumstances. The round ends, obviously, in a match when the result's been decided. Here we have a handshake. That round is over. In stroke play, when the player holes out at the final hole. And we have some guidance here about what happens in different forms of play, stroke play and 4-ball. So groups, let's talk about groups. In match play, the player and the opponent must be in the same group. Well, that makes sense. You got to be in the same group to have a match. In stroke play, same thing, and you must remain in the group set by the committee unless the committee approves a change either before or after it happens. An example of that could be you're playing in groups of 2. Clark and I are paired together, and during the round, I hurt my wrist, and I have to withdraw. So I sign Clarky's card, I give it to him, and I go in. And then the group behind us is also a twosome. They walk up on the tee, and Clarky says, well, I'll just go with you guys. And they continue to play. Well, that would be okay as long as the committee approved that change. And I think they would. But players just can't reorganize their groups because they feel like it. That would be a DQ penalty. All right, practice during the round or while play is stopped. Let's talk about that. Okay, you must not make a practice stroke at any ball on or off the course. Of course, we have an interpretation here that's an exception. Covers not only hitting a conforming ball, hitting any other type of ball, such as a plastic practice ball. That would be a problem. Striking a tee or natural object with a club is not a practice stroke. Okay, these are not practice strokes. You make a practice swing, no intent to strike the ball. That's okay. Hitting a ball back to the practice area or to another player when you're doing it as a courtesy, that's okay. And playing out a hole in a match where the results all been decided, that's okay. Well, not just in a match in stroke play. If you're playing in a team event and your partner is you're going to use his score and you're having a bunch of trouble, you can go ahead and play out the hole. That's not considered practice. Okay, between holes, must not make a practice stroke, but we're going to have some exceptions here. You're allowed to practice putting or chipping on or near the putting green of the hole last played, any practice green, and the teeing area of the next hole. So you're on your way from the 9th to the 10th hole, and you go by, there's a practice putting green right there, and you have just three-putted 3 holes in a row. Can you go over to that practice green and roll some putts? The answer is yes. No problem there. Okay, when practicing between holes is allowed. Here we have, I'm not going to go through all this. This is a great interpretation to mark down and review at your leisure of when are you actually between holes and then when is practice allowed, a match play, whether it's a singles match, foursome, or 4-ball. Good stuff right there. Very important to keep that in mind. When can a player practice between holes, especially in those team events? Okay, but you cannot practice from a bunker. Cannot practice from a bunker. That would be a breach. This was at the President's Cup, you might remember. I think it was Lahiri from the international team. He pulled his ball back into the bunker, and that was a breach. Cannot unreasonably delay play. Of course, the committee can put some prohibitions in place on or near the putting green of the hole just completed. We do that at the PGA Championship. We do that on the tours, and we do it in the section. So when you get done play of a hole, you cannot go back and make practice strokes on that putting green of the hole just completed. We want you to keep on moving to the next. Now, you can still practice on any practice putting green, and you can practice near the next tee. But this restriction can be put into prohibited on the putting green of the hole you just completed. When play is suspended, you shouldn't make a practice stroke except as allowed by the rule, by the committee, outside the course. Again, the committee is going to let you know when you can go ahead and start warming up and getting ready to play when you have a suspension. What about in a match stopped by agreement? Is this okay? Can these players practice? The answer is yes. These players can practice on the course. Again, this is a match play setting, not stroke play, so very, very different. Our penalty statement here, if it happens between the play of 2 holes, the penalty applies to the next hole because that's going to be assisting you on the next hole. Any questions on the first 5 sections of Rule 5? All right, I'm going to fly through this delay of play.
Yeah, Tom, I'm sorry, I was muted there. There's one question from Roger Hoover. Is there a penalty for teeing off prior to being announced?
Well, is there a penalty for playing prior to being announced? The penalty depends on if you have played before your time. So if your tee time is 9 a.m. and you're the first player to play, and you're teed up and it's 9 o'clock and you hit it before the field staff member announces your name, that's not a problem. Now, normally the person on the starter is going to cue you up and let you know, and it's probably a good idea to wait for their signal. But if you played, the trigger point for the penalty is if you played at 8:59 and 30 seconds, well, then you would have played early and you would get a penalty. So I hope that answers, I think that answers the question. Unreasonable delay of play. Obviously, we're talking about playing a hole or between holes. Here's a good example of what's, this is a really good interpretation here. What is reasonable? What is unreasonable? Briefly stopping in to grab a beverage, that's okay. You're wondering if you're going to committee suspended play because it's getting dark and you and your group are trying to decide whether you want to continue to play or not. That's reasonable. But going back a couple holes to get a lost club, looking for a ball for more than 3 minutes, all that stuff, that's going to be problematic. Good interpretation to have. You're allowed a short delay if you're getting help from a referee or the committee. That's okay. You get injured or you're ill, that's okay. Or there's another good reason. Again, what's reasonable here. Now, the penalty statements here, first breach of unreasonable delay is 1 stroke. Second breach is the general penalty, or 2 strokes, or loss of hole in match play. And the third breach would be DQ. If you delay play between holes, the penalty applies to the next hole. That's the hole you're delaying being played. Again, we want you to play at a prompt pace. You're encouraged to let people play through. I think we all know this. I wish our members would do more of this. Pace of play recommendations. Again, people should, these are all etiquette issues right here that are written right into the rule right now. Being prepared to make a stroke. Get near your ball so when it's your turn to play, you can go. Get to the next tee as quickly as you can. And you should prepare in advance for your next stroke and be ready to play when it's your turn. Don't we wish everybody did that? We now have a recommendation where a player should make a stroke in no more than 40 seconds. Even though in many cases we should be able to play faster than that. Let's talk about out of turn. Again, we talked about this, that there's no penalty for playing out of turn in either form of play unless players agree to do it to take advantage of the rules. But generally speaking, if it helps pace a play, go ahead. Now, we do know in match play, you can agree to play out of turn to save time. That's okay. And in stroke play, we have ready golf at our disposal, but we just need to do it safely. As a committee, you should have a guideline, should I say. We do it at all the high-level events. That's our chart. We have a lot of resources on the golf course to monitor pace of play, so we can do it consistently throughout the field. At the club level, it's a much larger challenge. And I'm not going to pick on, well, I am going to pick on the Golf Association. That they give us guidelines for the team matches, and they want us to use them for our members when they play team matches. And think about it. You might have you and maybe your assistant to have 1 or 2 people monitoring pace of play. To do it consistently is just not practical. So you do the best you can instead of using a very detailed pace of play guideline. All right. Last piece of this, and then we're done here. God, we're moving right along here. Stopping and resuming play. Again, I think we'll go through this during a round. Obviously, normally you can't just stop your play, of course, except what if the committee suspends play? What if you and your opponent in a match decide to stop in and have lunch? As long as you don't delay the competition, that's okay. Or if you think there's lightning, you can stop play and then tell the committee what you did. If the committee suspends play, all players must stop when the committee suspends play. And again, in match play, the second piece is about what players in a match can do. They just can't delay the competition. Now, if one player wants to resume, they've got to resume. The agreement is ended. If you think there's lightning, but you must report to the committee that you've stopped play because of lightning.
Some shots of these lightning bolts were scary stuff, and that happened right near the 18th green again. Our lock cameras caught that bolt.
At 4:17 yesterday, PGA officials suspended play. Then almost 30 minutes later, that's when the strike happened. Here's a close-up look at the tree that was hit yesterday. Atlanta Nordic Cab, 6 people hurt.
We were kind of just waiting for the players to come back. Just out of nowhere, lightning came, struck down. There was people, running everywhere, screaming.
I'll play that again.
Shots of these lightning bolts were scary stuff, and that happened right near the 18th green again. Our lock cameras caught that bolt.
At 4:17 yesterday, PGA officials suspended play. Then almost 30 minutes later, that's when the strike happened. Here's a close-up look at the tree that was hit yesterday. Atlanta Nordic Cab, 6 people hurt.
We were kind of just waiting for the players to come back. Just out of nowhere, lightning came, struck down. There was people, running everywhere, screaming.
I thought you might want to see that again. That's some wild video right there. I think we all remember that from last year. And that's what people do. They think we'll just go over under a tree over here and we'll be safe. But as you can tell, they weren't. Leaving the course is not of itself stopping play. If I stop in and grab a beverage in the clubhouse, I've not stopped play. That in of itself is not stopping play. Delay of play, we just talked about that, about unreasonable delay of play. If you stop play for any reason not covered by this rule, you're disqualified. And of course, failure to report to the committee when you're required to do so. So if you stop because you think there's lightning, remember that rule said you had to tell the committee what you did. If you didn't, you'd be disqualified. We got 2 kinds of suspensions with different requirements. So let's go through this. We have immediate, which is imminent danger, tornadoes, high winds, lightning, etc. Normal suspension, which would be for darkness or course unplayable. So if we have an immediate suspension, when the committee blows the horn, you must stop immediately at once. No more strokes can be played if the committee does this. So the committee should use a distinct method of telling players about an immediate suspension. And a normal suspension, obviously we have multiple blasts of the horn, usually 3. 1 long prolonged blast for immediate, 3 for a normal suspension, and then 2 for resumption is typically what we use. And what if you're between holes or while playing a hole? Let's talk about when you're between holes, you must stop. And you cannot make another stroke until the committee resumes play. So if you hear that horn between holes, you must stop. If you're playing a hole, well, then you have a choice to make. You can either stop or you can finish the hole that you're on. And that's if one player of your, let's say you're playing in a group of 3, if one player has made a stroke and started play of the hole, well, then now the whole group has begun that hole, and all those players have a choice. They can either stop or they can play out the hole if they want. We're going to give players a little bit of time to sort this out, no more than 2 minutes, as an example, to decide whether or not they want to play out the hole. And then if they do want to continue, they can go on and complete the hole, or they can stop before completing the hole. What does that mean? Well, imagine you're playing the 17th at Baltusrol, which is 650 yards, and one player has hit the tee shot, and it's getting dark, and you decide, you know what, we're going to go ahead and we're going to play. So everybody plays, you hit your third shots onto the green, and now it's really dark. Well, all that means now is you can then stop at that point and complete the whole play of the hole the next day. You can wait till the next day and go ahead and finish the hole then. Once you complete that hole, or if you stop, then you must not make any more strokes. Once you've completed the hole, well, then you've got to stop play. Once you've decided to stop, then no more strokes can be made. What if players don't agree? And let's talk about match play or stroke play. Again, in match play, we said players can agree to stop their match if they want to, as long as they're not unduly delaying the competition. But if one player wants to play and the other one doesn't, if one wants to stop, then they both have to stop in a match. That makes sense. If the player doesn't stop, we've got a general penalty, loss of hole. And stroke play, a little bit of a different story here. You've got 3 players in a group. Any player in the group may choose to stop or continue, no matter what the others in the group decide. Except that if I want to continue, then I've got to make sure that my marker comes with me to mark my score. If my marker isn't going to accompany me, then I'm going to have to stop at that point. Penalty for breach of this rule is disqualification. Again, there's no penalty if the committee decides that failure was justified. So remember, we said that if I stop play because I think there's lightning, and I have to tell the committee if my stopping of play was not justified, the penalty is DQ. If there's lightning, obviously the committee is going to agree with me, I'm sure, and at that point there'd be no penalty under that circumstance. So this is a great interpretation right here. Let's talk here. When is stopping play justified? You're on a remote part of the if you failed to stop play, you're in a remote part of the course and you didn't hear the horn, or it's real windy and you didn't hear the horn. And that can, if you don't have a lot of resources, that can happen very easily, especially at the club level. If a player has already taken their stance and put the club behind the ball, or you've begun your backswing and you don't hesitate and you make the stroke, well, then there's going to be no problem there. What's not justified is if you hear the signal, you've heard it, and then you decide to go ahead and tap in a short putt or take advantage of a favorable wind. We all remember what happened at the Head Pro Championship at Applebrook. Kind of very, very unusual circumstances there. But again, if you hear the horn and it's for an immediate suspension, you've got to stop. We have cases where it's justified if you didn't, and cases where it's not justified. Really good interpretation right here. One to tuck away there. All right, where do you resume play and when do you resume play? Obviously, I always like to call stoppages in play as a timeout called by the committee. So when the committee calls timeout, you have to stop. And then when you resume, you're going to go right back to where you were when play was stopped. So and even if it's on the next day. If you're between holes, obviously you're going to resume play on the next tee. You got to be present and ready to play when the committee wants to resume. And we're going to treat this just like your tee time. So you got to resume at the time designated by the committee. So if you're delayed from starting for any reason, then there's going to be no problem. Let's suppose you're two groups have completed, 2 groups were playing a hole and they both opted to finish. So when you resume, you've now got 2 groups on the next tee. If I'm in the second group, I'm going to have a little bit of extra time. As long as I'm ready to play and able to resume when it's my group's turn to play, I'm okay. Again, we got our DQ penalty here with our exceptions. Again, we're going to treat this just like being late to the tee, either starting early or starting late. We went through that pretty clearly there. Okay, lifting your ball when play is stopped and before play resumes. Keep in mind that we're going to treat these situations consistently. If play was suspended and I marked and lifted my ball, that player is going to get the same treatment as the player who opted not to lift their ball. And we'll go through this. So the player, when play is suspended, you can mark the spot of your ball and lift it if you want to. You don't have to, but you can if you want to. So when play was lifted, what does this player have to do? They got to replace, and they're allowed to substitute here. And this makes sense. You can put the original ball back or you can substitute. If you don't know the spot, you can estimate. If the ball was not lifted, well, this player is going to get the same deal. They can mark, they can lift it, they can put another ball in play and substitute, and then they're going to replace just like the other player had that had lifted the ball. So again, we're going to treat these players the same. Now, if the lie is altered from the lifting, mind you, as I'm lifting the ball, I alter my lie. Well, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to place, if it's in the general area, other than sand, I'm going to, let me back up for a minute here. If I'm not in sand and my lie is altered from the lifting, I'm going to place the ball in the nearest lie most similar, not more than a club length. If I'm in sand, I'm going to recreate. That's what we talk about when we get to Rule 14.2. That's as a part of the lifting of the ball. If the lie ball is altered after the ball was lifted, so I marked, lifted my ball, and then this lie was altered before it's replaced, this rule doesn't apply. Now what we're going to have to look at is, again, the original ball or another ball must be replaced on the original spot. And if the cats were worsened, then we're going to go to this rule. And essentially here, if it's by natural forces or worsened by the player, we've got to accept that. If it was worsened by any other person or by an obstruction or by an animal, well, then Rule 8.1d applies, and we're going to be able to restore. This is playing traffic cop and pointing you to this rule. If this has happened when your ball has been lifted and it's in your hand. What if your marker has been moved while play is stopped? Well, we're going to put it back. We're going to put the marker back, or we can just go ahead and put the ball back or a substituted ball back, as long as we get that ball back on the spot as marked by that coin, by that ball marker. And if we don't know the spot, we're going to estimate. And we can either put the coin back, or we can just go ahead straight away and put the ball back on that estimated spot if we don't know what it is. All right, our general penalty, 2 strokes in stroke play, loss of hole in match play. If we play from a wrong place, we're just getting the general penalty here, even if there's other breaches involved here. All right, lots going on. I think we're at our tipping point here. One quick question here at the end. Let's read this. Which is false? Starting playable and starting a player is considered ready to play if he has at least 1 club and 1 ball ready for immediate use. I think we all would say that's true. B, rules prohibit one group from playing through unless the committee approves it before or after it happens. Well, not so sure about that. Let's hold on to that for a moment. Let's go to C. Between play at 2 holes, the default position of the rule is that practice or putting or chipping on or near the putting green of the hole just completed is permitted in both match play and stroke play. That sounds true. And D, in stroke play, agreeing to play ready golf throughout a round is not considered deliberately agreeing to ignore a rule. I think we'd say that that's true. So our answer is going to be B, playing through. You don't need the permission. There's no breach if you play, if groups allow someone to play through. We want that to happen from an etiquette standpoint. Any questions on Rule 5? Wow, lots going on there. All right. Clarky, you still there? Clarky must be asleep.
No, Clarky just had to go and unmute himself.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
I would never sleep during your presentation, pal.
Hey, remember that's Neil Young's song in Crazy Horse, Russ Never Sleeps. What an album. All right. Any questions on rules 4 and 5 here today? All right. Matt, it's all you, buddy.
Okay. Thank you everyone for attending. Just a reminder, we do have several other webinars scheduled over the next week and a half. Even though courses are opening, we still plan to host those webinars, as we're aware that probably you won't have a full staff just yet. We have 2 more rules webinars scheduled for this Thursday at 9 a.m. and next Thursday, the 7th at 9 a.m. We have a happy hour this coming Thursday at 4 with our partner Trinity Flavors. So if you're interested in that, we are doing a curbside pickup of some of their product that morning. And we're having a fitness for coaching webinar on Monday the 4th at 3 p.m. And then a cool one, we've got Michael Breed coming in on Tuesday the 5th for a personal branding webinar at 3 as well. So with that, if you have any questions, you can reach out to these folks on the rules committee on your own, or shoot me a message and we'll help you out. But thanks everyone for attending.
Great.
Thanks, everybody. Be safe.
Okay. Take care there, Carp.